Howdy historians, Mr. Montgomery here, getting ready to bring you today's flip lesson on the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. So for today, as we look at these two different groups, we'll of course do a little bit of review and remember where we're coming from as we take sides after the ratification of the Constitution. We'll see who these Anti-Federalists and Federalists are. We'll take a look at some of their leaders, arguments, strategy, some of the pros and cons of each group, and then of course, let me get that out of there for you. There we go. We will look ahead to see how this is going to impact the future of American history. But before we get too far, of course, a couple reminders for you. It's the usual lineup. Make sure that your vocabulary is finished so you can understand the material in a deeper way as we go through it. Make sure that you have also completed the readings assigned to this lesson, so that way you have a good base understanding of what's happening here. Of course, take notes as we go. Keep that outline out so you can stay organized, and then answer your post-assessment summary questions and be ready to chat them up during class tomorrow. So let's go ahead and get into it. Make sure you have your notes out. Make sure you're ready to go. And let's check out the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, and let's see what's happening here as we start to take sides. Now, it's important to remember that the Constitutional Convention had passed a pretty important document on September 17th of 1787. This, of course, is the United States Constitution. Now, when this document was passed, it has to be put out to the states to be ratified. The rules are pretty simple. 9 out of the 13 states have to ratify this for it to become law of the land. And of course, this is going to be an event. This is going to be an issue. And any event or issue is going to have two sides. And of course, there's going to be debate whenever you have two sides present on either side of a situation. So here we're going to have the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. In a nutshell, Federalists are people who favor the Constitution as is. Anti-Federalists are those who want to see some changes, if not a complete denial of the document from entering in as supreme law of the land. So pretty early on, people are going to pick which side they're going to support here, and we're going to see the Federalists and Anti-Federalists start to get organized, start to distribute information, and try to influence people's opinions. These are going to be political factions. They're not going to turn into political parties per se, because they're not going to stick around very long, but they're going to be a faction. They're going to be a group of people that gets together for a short period of time to try to get something done. For the Federalists, they're trying to get the Constitution ratified. For the Anti-Federalists, they're trying to get major changes to the Constitution, if not the complete denial of it from entering into the law of the land. So let's start to dive into the Anti-Federalists here. Let's take a little bit closer look at who these people are that oppose the strong federal government. Great little summary of the Anti-Federalists here. You can see my buddy George Mason with his awesome hair and, of course, hand-in jacket, because every true gentleman has his hand inside his jacket when he has his portrait painted or picture taken. That'll be a common theme in all of history. All starts with Napoleon, but I digress. Check out that quick little chart there for a nice summary of the Anti-Federalists, and then go on a little scavenger hunt. Try to identify who these fine fellows with powdered hair are. And let's go ahead and take a look at who some of these guys are. So, I've already introduced you to George Mason. He's going to be one of the leaders of the Anti-Federalists. We're also going to have our old friend Patrick Henry and John Hancock entering the foray on the side of the Anti-Federalists. In a more general sense, the Anti-Federalists are going to have a lot of support from the backcountry, for more of the poorer classes and more of the people who are devoted to states' rights. It's people who fear the strong centralized government, and it makes sense that these people would have a legitimate fear. I mean, remember, they just got done fighting against an incredibly strong centralized government in King George III and the British monarchy. So they don't want to simply go back to the way things used to be. And they have some pretty legitimate complaints. They have some pretty legitimate arguments when it comes to why the Constitution is a flawed document. Their number one argument basically says this, that a strong central government would destroy the work of the revolution. It's going to ultimately limit democracy, it's going to limit states' rights, and it's going to abuse its power. This is a common theme in political science, in the political thought, that if you give someone power, they're going to abuse it. They've done sociological and psychological tests on this kind of stuff. Power usually does corrupt, so this is a pretty legitimate argument that the Anti-Federalists have. They don't want to go back and have to fight another revolution. A lot of their strategy, they argue that the proposed Constitution contained no protection of individual rights, and this was a very legitimate concern, and they're eventually going to receive a concession on this, and it's going to be called the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, but more on that later. Number two, in their strategy, they tried to argue that the Constitution gave the central government more power than the British ever had. And when we think about the control that the British Crown had over the colonies, once again, this is a pretty legitimate argument. In the period of salutary neglect, there was almost no oversight, and every colony was allowed to operate, function, and grow on its own, and things went pretty well during that time. So they don't want to see too heavy-handed of a government come in, one that's even worse than the government or more powerful than the one that they had just fought against in the American Revolution. And of course, there's going to be some pros and cons here. There's going to be some advantages and disadvantages that the Anti-Federalists have. Excuse me, Anti-Federalists have. One advantage, they appeal to simply the popular distrust of government. Throughout the colonial experience, people came to fear the central government. They came to fear the arbitrary abuse of power that the government would at times exercise. So from the imperial crisis, we can see that there's a lot of distrust towards the government. And of course, they talk about how the Constitution is going to kill the sovereignty of the states. It's going to jeopardize individual freedoms. You know, it does some scary things like creating a standing army. It erects a federal stronghold in Washington, D.C., I mean, there's even the omission of any reference to God. So this is kind of a scary document to them. And these are some serious advantages that they have as they're going to go out and try to fight. That there's some problems, there's some distrust, and that not everyone likes the government. The big disadvantage here for the Anti-Federalists is that they're poorly organized. They don't have as good a leadership as the Federalists are going to have, and they're going to be slow to respond to some of the Federalist challenges. As we're going to see, the Federalists are going to win the war for information, and that's going to be incredibly important for their cause. So the Anti-Federalists, they're more of the lower classes, but also some very powerful elites in there who simply fear a strong centralized government, and as we can see, they have some pretty legitimate concerns. Now, the Federalists, of course, are going to be on the other side of this line, and they're going to be on the other side of the issue. The Federalists, they're going to be led by guys like Alexander Hamilton, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and James Madison. So some of the classic figures from the Revolution. Of course, the Federalists are going to have some very legitimate arguments themselves. Alexander Hamilton is one of the most brilliant political minds around. George Washington is a trusted leader. Benjamin Franklin is a trusted statesman. So they have a little bit of clout. They have more name recognition than the Anti-Federalists have. Oh, covering up good old B. Frank here. Excuse me. There we go. Get rid of that belly for him. These men have some clout. They have some power. People listen to them because these are a lot of the leaders, especially Benjamin Franklin and George Washington, that guided us through the Revolution. And in the more general sense, they're going to have a lot of support from the more wealthy, better educated fringes of society. They're going to be much more organized than the Anti-Federalists. They're going to have money to throw at the issue, and they also control the printing presses. Now, this really cannot be overlooked, and it's important. At the time that the Constitution goes out for ratification, when it goes out in 1787, out of more than 100 newspapers that were published during that time, only 12 supported the Anti-Federalist cause. The battle for information is important whenever you're fighting a political campaign or you're in a political battle, if you will, and the Federalists are going to have the upper hand there, and that's going to be a big advantage for them. So their arguments, they really believe that the strong central government was needed to maintain order and to preserve the Union. They saw what happened during Shays' Rebellion, and they knew that something had to change, and that there wouldn't be any type of confederation or union if you didn't have a stronger centralized government to keep everything together. You've also got to remember the debt problems that are present at this time, the fact that foreign countries are on the continent and anxious to get a piece of the land that we have. So maintaining this order and preserving the Union is a pretty legitimate concern. Now, their strategy is going to be helped because, once again, they own the printing presses. But they really emphasize the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. You've seen this in any political race that you've observed during your lifetime. One of the best ways to defeat a political candidate or idea is to bring up their track record. When you look at the track record of the Articles of Confederation, it was a massive failure. Things did not go well. So they can simply point to things like Shays' Rebellion and the debt and foreign pressures and say, why would we keep doing the same thing over and over again? The definition of insanity. This isn't getting us anywhere. So emphasizing the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation was a key strategy for them. They also showed their opponents as merely negative opponents with no real solutions. This really was a little bit of political maneuvering. We're going to actually see some pretty solid proposals by the Anti-Federalists, like including the Bill of Rights. But once again, they controlled the information. They controlled the presses, so they could just show the Anti-Federalists as a bunch of negative Nellies that didn't have any real solutions, and that worked for them very well. But the most important strategy, of course, was simply just looking to the Articles of Confederation to show that a stronger government was needed. Now, for their advantages, they're going to have strong leaders. They're very well organized, and like I said, they own the majority of the printing presses. The disadvantage, the Constitution is new and it's untried. And as it was originally written, it lacked a Bill of Rights. And getting new ideas off the ground can be very difficult to do, especially when they have incredibly heavy outcomes and consequences associated with them. If the new Constitution, if the new government works, things could go very well. But if it fails, we could slide back into a second revolution. This is a very powerful idea. This is a very powerful decision, a very important decision that these men have to make. And whenever you have a new idea like the Constitution, that weight is there. Extra gravity is added to your decision. And that is something that's going to play against them. And really, not having a Bill of Rights was a fatal flaw in the Constitution. We just got done fighting the English crown for our rights. You've got to have a list of them in there. But of course, people are going to be worried that if you list them, you might miss one. But eventually, we're going to see the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, and that is going to be taken care of. So we see some very legitimate concerns from both the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists about the fate of our country. The Anti-Federalists really believe that the Constitution is too strong and that it's going to take us back to a state even worse than what we saw in the imperial crisis, as the Federalists are worried that if we don't get something done, the very idea of the United States of America may go away and may be taken away from us. This decision was incredibly important, whether or not to ratify the Constitution, and serious debates would break out. This was a very heated political issue that people discussed and took strong sides on. You were a Federalist or you were an Anti-Federalist. And these two groups are going to really influence the decisions that are made in the states. And that is where we will pick up when we start to look ahead. As you can see the map on the left, we have a pretty divided populace in people who are in a Federalist or Anti-Federalist majority, and of course some evenly divided areas. We also see an important political cartoon that I'm not going to explain just yet, but I'll let you take a pause, read it, take a look at it. You'll be able to decipher it very quickly. Use those good critical thinking skills, ladies. Get it done, take a couple notes on it, so that way we can discuss it as a way to introduce ratifying the Constitution out in the States. As usual, make sure that before tomorrow you have your vocabulary finished and your discussion questions ready to go. If you have any questions, make sure you take note of them so that way we can discuss them right at the beginning of class. Make sure you understand this information before we start to apply it, and then bring all your materials to class tomorrow. Bring your vocabulary, bring your notes, bring your reading notes, bring your discussion questions, and we'll be good to go. So there you go. That is today's flipped lesson for the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. We'll see you tomorrow for a further discussion. You must be the change that you wish to see in the world. Tell me who said that tomorrow for 1 point of extra credit. See ya. Peace. I'm out of here.